setting new standards in podcast excellence. You have joined the WBT, fully focused on business and taxes. Here is your host, Michael Lodge.
And welcome to the WBT. This is Mike Lodge. So my prior podcast was about politics. This podcast is something that I'm in support of, and that's podcasts. Especially business podcasts. So that's going to be our conversation for today. I'll be right back.
This is brought to you by Lodge & Co., a business and tax advisory firm where your success is our goal. Call us today toll-free at 888-681-1518 or visit us at www.lodge-co.com and learn more about what we can do for you. Lodge & Co., your source for sound business and tax services.
I don't know about you, but I've become addicted to listening to podcasts. When I go to sleep at night, I have a podcast playing so I can listen to it and get a little bit more knowledge in another area of life that I'm not familiar with. But I love business podcasts, and that's why I developed my business podcast. I developed it 3 years ago. And have I made any money? No, because it was never designed to make any money. It was designed for me as an accountant, as a tax guy, as a business mediator, to use it as an educational tool. Now, you're going to hear commercials being played at the beginning, at the end, sometimes in the middle, and you're going to hear my commercial for my own firm. But do I make any money off of those commercials at the very beginning, at the end? Very, very little. Very little. It's pennies on the dollar that you make off of those types of things. Now, I don't have a sponsor because I haven't gone after a sponsor or a main advertiser. I've been offered, but I've turned them down because I really wanted to work on my podcast, develop it, and see exactly where it leads before I begin getting advertisers to come on board. Now, I'd love to have advertisers now because I'm 3 years into it. I have a good listening base. I'm all over the world and in the United States, but I haven't really gone after it because I enjoy the process of talking to you on an individual basis in teaching you about various aspects of taxation and mediation and all the other subjects that I cover. Even Political Tuesday when I do a political show. Now, do I like Political Tuesday? No, I hate it, but it's something. You'd be surprised how politics affects us in our business lives. What happens in Washington, D.C., even up into the presidential level, it affects us in our businesses. And what happens in our states and what happens into our local governments, it affects us. So I talk about that on Political Tuesday. I don't like politics, but I have to do it. But it's so funny because my number one listening show is Political Tuesday. Pisses me off. They don't want to listen to business issues. They want to listen to the political issues. And I don't want to do a full political show. I could if I wanted to because I got a lot to say about it. But I also have a lot of teaching that I have to do. So I wanted to talk about podcasts. Now, a lot of you probably are saying, I would really like to develop my own podcast. Go do it. But don't think of it as a business. Think of it as whatever tool that you're going to use it for. A lot of good things can come from podcasts. Especially when you are trying to promote better business decisions from people, thinking about the process. But to start a podcast, you're going to have to first of all decide what you're going to talk about. Maybe it's time you start a podcast. If you have a subject that you want to talk about, go for it. There are business podcasts, there are scary show podcasts, there are, and the list goes on. There are all kinds of podcasts out there. I can listen to these things for hours because I have found that people are very creative in their presentation. But if you're going to start a podcast, what are you going to talk about? And then start podcasting, you need to follow a few basic steps. One, come up with a concept and theme. Identify a topic you're passionate about. A format, a target length for each episode. And then pick a name for your podcast. Design a logo, because people are going to have to recognize you among the other thousands and thousands of podcasts out there. So you've got to have a logo that people are going to remember. And write a really good description or content for listing on your podcast platforms, whatever one you're going to use. I use Spreaker. And I've used it from day one because I found it the easiest to use. Listen, mine is not about technology. My view is, if it's easy to use, that's the one I'm going to use and keep probably. And Spreaker has been easy for me to use and to do everything else I need to do. And then record and edit your audio files as a MP3S, and identify where you'd like to host them, like Libsyn, Podbean, Spreaker, where I'm at, and there's a whole bunch of others out there. And then syndicate the audio files into an RSS. As an example for me, I'm all the way out there. I am on so many different things. I'll tell you exactly right now. I'll go to my podcast, and I will tell you exactly where I'm at and how every single day I have got to focus on my distribution. And the more you distribute, the better that you have an audience. So right now, I'm on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, a generic Android app that's out there, LAVF, Stitcher, Overcast, Spotify, Castbox, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Podcast Republic, Pocket Cast, Player FM, Podcast Addict, Google Podcasts, and then the list goes on. There's probably about 30 some distribution points that I have to monitor every single day. And then I'm also monitoring I'm monitoring what cities that they're going into, how long people are listening to them, are they downloading or are they live listening to them? And the more downloads that you have, the better, because then it's going into other places. So there's a lot of things that you need to look at when starting a podcast. Now, there are ways to monetize your podcast, but do not expect that you're going to be up into that $100,000 range. It's very difficult to get there unless you have over 1 million plus listeners. And most podcasts have in the 100,000 area listener. So you've got to look at that, and then what age groups and everything else. And then you have to look at posting to all of your social medias of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram IGTV, and the list goes on there too. So if you're going to podcast, you're going to have to be consistent, and you're going to have to become dedicated to it. And you're going to have to love what you're doing. And you're going to have to also love the process of writing your content or creating your content. Because the content is the key to the whole situation. If people are not liking what you're saying, they're not going to stay with you very long. I love podcasting. I usually do my podcasting early in the morning. Right now, it's about 7 a.m. that I'm recording this podcast. But I love the process of getting up. I usually prepare the night before. If I can write a blog that I can use as a podcast, or if I can find somebody else's blog that fits into my narrative of what I want to talk about, I use it. You have to be very careful about the music, because there's a lot of licensed music out there that don't like you, that will not allow you to play on your podcast. You have to go out there and literally, like my theme song that rolls me into this show, I had to go out and purchase that. and it becomes very costly. The tape that you hear that introduces me, I had to pay for that. So or you can just go ahead and just do a podcast without any of that. So what I'm trying to do is I'm very in favor of podcasts because it really does a lot of good. And not only that, but when I'm driving, I have driven across country so many times over the past few years, from the East Coast to the West Coast, from the West Coast to the East Coast. And I have listened to podcasts all the way. And you would be surprised how many podcasts are out there that talk about podcasting and how to podcast and all the various techniques and everything else that they're out there for you to listen to. School of Podcasting is one of them. Great program that shows you guys how to begin your podcast and what to look for and what to listen for and all of the various organizations and events that are out there for podcasters. But you have to really enjoy this. Now, I got into this really because I love radio and television broadcasting. In college, as an elective, I took radio and TV broadcasting, where we went through the whole process of going down to Portland, Oregon, to the federal building, sitting and taking a test for a third-class radio license so that we could be on the radio at our school station on KGTS in Walla Walla, Washington. But I love that process. And you'd be surprised how much I learned from that now applies to what I'm doing now. And I'm very thankful. Now, that was over... Oh my gosh, I was in the 70s. 74, 75, 76, 77. And spending that time on the radio, I had Saturdays that were my time slot. And I really enjoyed it. I never went into it as a full-time gig because there's not that many jobs out there in that field. But I took it on because I thought it would help me in other areas, which it did. Later on, I produced some concerts and I produced some other things. And now I'm producing and doing this podcast. But everything that I learned from that educational program at Walla Walla was a really good experience for me. Now, back then, we had old machines. We had these big rooms that were full of technology. I mean, they were huge. And you have these sliding glass doors, and it was air conditioned and everything. Now everything is done very small. You can go anywhere and do a podcast. Because Spreaker has a really good program that you can record your podcast on your cell phone as you're traveling. You can have all of the same music. You can have all of everything that you need to produce your podcast on your cell phone as you're traveling. Now, it's not as good as being in your own home studio or office studio, but it can be done. So the point that I'm trying to make is I believe in podcasts. Podcasts are becoming even more popular. I think I saw a study that said 60% of Americans now know what a podcast is and listen to one. So that's really good news. It's just that there are thousands of them out there. And honestly, it is a joy to go through them all just to see exactly what they're all doing and how they produce their podcasts and how good they sound and how the content is written. So it's a good experience to become involved in podcasting. But I'm going to be very honest with you. Don't expect to make any money in it. Very small. You're not going to be able to support a family. Unless, again, you get up into the million-plus listening range. Then you can start asking for good advertising dollars. But as of this moment, if you're really interested in podcasting, go for it. Study up on it. Go to Flipboard and search podcasts, or go to Google and Google in the words how to start a podcast. Go to YouTube. There are YouTube videos out there. Some of them are old and outdated, because the technology of podcasting changes every single day. The equipment that you're using as microphones are changing every single day. So you have to keep up. It's just one of those things. Just like in tax law, you have to keep up. In your car maintenance, you have to keep up. Everything that you do in life, you've got to keep up because it changes moment by moment, second by second. So if you would like to start a podcast, I'll support you in it. Let me know what it's going to be called. Send me a text. Or if you have a podcast right now, send me a text at 818-252-5682. Let me know what your podcast name is because I want to listen to it. And let's support each other podcasting. It is really great fun. And you will be able to reach so many different people with whatever subject matter that you want to reach. And there's some really good causes out there, really good companies out there, really good programs that use podcasting to reach thousands and millions of people. Go for it. Podcast your little hearts out. This is Mike Lodge for the WBT. I will be back with you tomorrow. Everyone have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the WBT with Michael Lodge. Join us again tomorrow as we explore more about business and taxes. Follow us on iHeartRadio and go to our podcast website at www.wbtpod.com and listen to all of our podcasts and read our blogs.
This podcast has been produced by Michael Lodge, fully focused on content.